Welcome to Ensuring Success, the podcast that takes you on a journey to unlock the keys of achieving not just fleeting victories, but sustainable and fulfilling success. This is Ensuring Success. Welcome everyone to the first official episode of Ensuring Success, a Houchens Insurance Group podcast. I'm Natalie Crawford, and I'll be helping to co-host this first series, and joining me is Lydia Gilliam. Lydia is the Vice President of Talent and Culture here at HIG, so she knows a thing or two about what we're going to be talking about, which is really the foundation of our culture, and that is ownership mentality. And Lydia and I spend time talking today about the benefits of ownership mentality, what it is, how we foster it here in our agency, and then also the challenges to creating an ownership mentality mindset among our employee owners. I'm super excited you guys are joining us and excited for you to hear all of what Lydia has to offer. And without further ado, let's jump in. Lydia, thank you for joining me to have this conversation today. I'm so excited to jump into this with you. And for our first question that we will ask every guest on the podcast, how do you ensure success?
Well, thank you, Natalie. I am happy to be here, excited about this podcast. Fortunately, I knew that this question was coming. I know it's our staple question of how we want to start our podcast, asking all guests. And so I was able to put a little bit of thought into it and really reflect personally on what that means in my life. And, I think what that comes down to for me is I've lived long enough to know that not much in life can be controlled. But what I can do is I can control the way I carry myself. I can control the way I respond to things, the way that I develop myself, my attitude. Those are all things that I can control. And I can control my outlook and that being positive. And so I think just trying to look at everything as an opportunity and from the lens of how I can make something work for the good or turn out in a positive way. That's just something that I've learned to do over time. And it's just really started to become a part of my mindset. I work around a lot of people who have a way of looking at things that are really challenging from a positive lens, and so I think I've just been fortunate enough to develop by their mentorship and thinking that way. And it's just, I think it's a great way to ensure success really in all aspects of life.
Love that, and I think that's great. And how you mentioned mentorship, and that'll be a big part of our conversation, I'm sure, with ownership mentality, because that's kind of one of the fundamental pillars of ownership mentality is having those mentors in place that have walked those journeys ahead of people. So Let's go ahead and start out by just defining what exactly an ownership mentality is in the context of the workplace.
Yeah. When you think about ownership mentality, you really, in my mind, you break that down and you think, okay, owner, what does being an owner mean? And that means if I'm an owner, I have stake in something. I can lose or gain something as an outcome of my actions. And so I think having ownership means that, in an ownership mentality, I think it means that I'm taking responsibility for those outcomes, the good, bad, the ugly, whatever that may be. But even further, in my mentality, I'm also taking responsibility for what got me to those outcomes. And really taking responsibility for the influence that I have over those outcomes. And it's just a way of approaching whatever comes your way.
So we talk about it a lot here at Houchens Insurance Group, and it's definitely a buzzword. If you spend any amount of time in one of our offices, you will either hear or see the words ownership mentality, because it's something that really just kind of floats throughout each of our offices and our people. So what would you say distinguishes an employee with an ownership mentality from someone who simply comes in and does their job?
So, Natalie, I think, would you be okay if we kind of talked about why we have that ownership mentality within the organization?
100%.
Yeah. So, you know, we are, for anyone who doesn't know, we're Houchens Insurance Group. We are a part of the largest 100% employee-owned employee stock ownership plan in the country. And it is a pretty amazing opportunity to be a part of. And so what being a part of an ESOP means is that there's no one owner of the organization or board of stakeholders. We are all the owners, all the employees of Houchens Industries are owners in the organization. And so I really think that creates a foundation of that ownership mentality when you are actual owners in the organization. And so I think when we think about ownership mentality from versus somebody who simply is just doing their job, I think in those two scenarios the behaviors are going to be different. And what I mean by that is the behaviors are going to be different that you see in an owner and in somebody that's just working a job, because the motivators are different. If I have a job and I see it that way, and we've all had jobs, right? We've all had ones that felt like a job to us and we treated it like a job. But if I have a job, I'm more than likely being held accountable by my superior, and that's my motivation. It's extrinsic. There's more than likely there's a carrot or a stick that's inspiring my actions. And, you think about example, I'm not going to show up to work late. If I'm in a job, I'm not going to show up to work late because I'm going to get reprimanded is why I'm not going to show up late to a job.
Right.
But on the other side of that, if I have ownership mentality, I think the difference is that's intrinsic motivation, and that inspires my actions. And so I'm not driven by others. I'm not driven by the carrot or the stick, but my drive is internal. And so if you take that same example of I'm not going to show up late versus I'm not going to show up late because I'm going to get in trouble from my manager. Well, in the owner's mentality, I'm not going to show up late because I know it's going to impact my effectiveness in what I do. And so I think the main difference in those two things are what motivates us, and it totally reframes our mindset and how you approach things. And I think you've got to have intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. I think you need a combination of both.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think as leaders in our organization, we want to inspire a intrinsic motivation through our culture, and people are naturally inspired to succeed and do well in what they do every day.
Okay, so Lydia, we touched on a couple of different things, but let's swing back to some specific behaviors and attitudes that indicate someone has embraced this ownership mentality that we're talking about.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like this can play out in a bunch of different ways and behaviors that we would see or benefit from in the organization. First would be probably somebody's initiative and their approach to their work and their again, we talked about motivations, and I also think that can play out a lot in problem solving. If I've got a problem and it's mine and I feel ownership over it, I'm going to approach it totally different. I think an ownership mentality is going to be probably more proactive versus reactive, because we're going to try to avoid some of those problems.
Yes.
And speaking of problems, we're not, as owners with ownership mentality, we're not going to go and drop a problem on somebody's desk, but that's a philosophy that we live by here at HIG is don't bring a problem without a solution.
Right.
Take that next step to think through, okay, what does resolution for this look like? I also think it's about personal development too. Is if I'm an owner, I'm going to try to develop myself in order to be able to contribute on a larger scale to the organization. I'm going to be more collaborative and probably bring people in to conversations to be able to collaborate and make us all better in what we do. I think I'm going to be, owners are probably going to be more committed to do whatever it takes to get the job done for the greater good. And, those are just a few ways that I can think of, but gosh, the list goes so much further than that. But,
right.
And being probably another one I would add to that is being adaptable.
Yes.
And being able to pivot whenever you need to, when things, we talked about earlier, so many things are out of our control. But being able to be adaptable and pivot and move and make changes with anything that comes our way would all be a part of those behaviors that I think you would see from somebody coming who has an ownership mentality.
Listening to you talk, it's not something that I had thought actively about, but I would say that problem solving and being an active participant in problem solving is one of those big pieces, and coming to a problem with a solution and a resolution to it is a key component that I had never really thought about. But thinking back on some of the dealings that I've had with, different coworkers and people in the organization, is I have experienced that, where they're coming and saying, here's what's going on and here's what we're facing, but I've got the solution. Here's my thought.
Yeah, and so it totally changes the conversation, because you're not just dropping something on somebody's desk to solve, but you're really becoming a partner with them in solving whatever that is, because we're thinking like owners and we're pulling the same direction and have the same end goal in mind.
Yes. And so that kind of segues into our next conversation and my next question. Why do you find that it's important for both employees and leaders to cultivate an ownership mentality? And I think that problem solving is probably a big piece of that, because that's probably in a lot of organizations left up to the leaders to just be brought the problems to solve, whereas in our organization we look at it a little bit differently.
There's really so many benefits that come from cultivating that ownership mentality for both employees and leaders. And first I think about it creates such a positive employee experience when somebody can come in and they feel empowered in their role and as an individual contributor, and feel like they are a part of something bigger than themselves. I think as humans, we all have an internal drive or need to be able to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. And so being able to create that environment where that's inspired, I think it does a lot for the personal development of people. And I think it creates a growth path for the individual that's maybe outside of a hierarchy within the company. I mean,
Right.
they're growing within the role that they're sitting in, just by being able to take, even if they don't change or promote job titles, they're growing just by taking on more responsibility and ownership in what they do, which ultimately could result in a promotion or job title change or additional responsibilities, because they're able to showcase that to their leadership. And so I think there's tons of benefits that go into having this ownership mentality. And I think what it also does is it allows for the organization to really scale what we're doing. When you've got somebody that's sitting in a seat with responsibilities, and they are completely taking ownership of what they do, as the business is able to scale and go to new levels. And so I think it creates a lot of benefit for both the employees and the organization and leaders, which, scaling our business ultimately makes us more profitable and makes us more successful in our
organizational goals and what we're trying to achieve. And honestly, what any organization would be trying to achieve is to continue to scale and have those opportunities for individual contributors as well as leaders, and for them to work in tandem, I think, is a big piece of it too.
Yeah.
So, what Lydia doesn't know in her wonderful state of preparation and planning for this podcast is that I reached out to our CEO, Andy Barker, and I asked him, as we're going through the benefits of an ownership mentality culture, that if you were trying to sell an ownership mentality culture to another organization, what would be your top 3 selling points? And I'm just curious if how much your all's answers would align. And for our listeners of this podcast, Lydia and Andy work incredibly closely together in ensuring that this ownership mentality and this culture is safeguarded. I'm interested to see how Lydia's answers align with Andy's. So, Lydia, again, if you were to sell an ownership mentality culture to another organization, what would be your top 3 selling points? And don't kill me.
I love that you did this. No, it's good. I think the first thing would be it creates a common thread between us all. We're in our ownership mentality. Our organization is incredibly as a component of having ownership mentality and inspiring that within your culture. It really requires your organization to be really transparent in where you are and what your opportunities are, and celebrate wins, but also, there's some vulnerability there. But what it does is it creates a common thread of ownership of we're all pulling in the same direction and working to achieve a common goal together.
I love that. So one of Andy's answers was that I feel truly does kind of fit in with that was that he said a non-corporate feel that has a family-focused organization. And I think the pulling in the same direction and working as a common thread and everybody pulling in the same direction, I think that exactly encompasses his answer on that.
He and I actually talk all the time about we don't ever want to be corporate, because that corporate feeling is what makes people feel like they're just a number.
Right.
And it's harder. The bigger you get, the harder it is to have that intimate feel. But I know in our organization, within the leadership team, we spend a ton of time thinking about how we can continue to inspire that ownership mentality and that family feel and more intimate culture atmosphere, because that's just so incredibly important. And so I think my other selling point for ownership mentality would be probably the innovation and problem solving aspect. Innovation and problem solving are approached in totally different ways when you're an owner or have a feeling of an ownership. Are approached completely different. You're willing to explore other options and think out of the box if it means that you're going to be able to get a step closer to meeting organizational goals. And so I think probably, innovation and problem solving is huge. And then I think maybe the third one I would say is just that intrinsic motivators. I think people are inspired to do good things when they have a stake in it, when they feel that ownership that they have and have pride in what they're doing. There's a whole nother level of pride that you have when there's that ownership mentality involved. And so I would say just intrinsically motivated to do well for the organization.
So I'm laughing a little bit because Andy's other 2 answers were commitment through ownership to always improve and become more educated, enhancing the company's intellectual knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think that goes perfectly with your second one as far as innovation and encouraging people to be the problem solvers and find the new ways to do things. And then his last one was empowered individuals that treat their responsibilities like individual owners.
Yeah.
So I think, as expected, those all 3 align pretty closely. And Lydia, I love listening to you talk about ownership mentality, because I know with how closely we work together, how passionate you are about it for each of our employees to experience that culture and have that mentality and that mindset. And I'm curious, and I don't want you to go into too deep of detail based on some of our future podcast plans, but if you could share, have you always felt this ownership mentality that we're talking about, or was there a particular light bulb moment for you where you really had that mindset shift?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I think for me, I do remember at one point in my career, I recognized that, number one, I'm a part of an incredible industry. Number two, I'm a part of a organization that's growing like crazy. And so with those two things, really the opportunities are up to me.
Right.
And I do remember realizing that at some point in my early career of, hey, the opportunities are endless. And so the ball's in my court. And so it's up to me to develop. It's up to me to take my responsibilities and execute them to the best of my ability. And, the cool thing, I will say, and it's really one of my favorite things about our organization and really about being on the HR side of things is when you're in HR, you're exposed to a lot of things inside the organization. And one of those things is the growth paths of others.
Right.
And what I love, one of my favorite things about what I get to do every day is I love seeing our organization grow and the opportunities that people have to grow with it and to grow in it. And I love when I see people recognize those opportunities and completely take hold of them, and just the opportunities that they have to promote and take on new responsibility, the financial opportunities that they have to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, I know I'm privy to that in HR, and it's really cool to see. And so I think I did recognize that pretty early in my career of, man, I'm in a great organization and it's up to me. And so I think that's probably when that ownership mentality kind of took off.
Right. And I think we've got a great executive leadership team that truly wants so much for each employee owner in our organization and wants them to experience all of those growth paths and career moves that benefit them best. I know that Andy, we joke about his sayings, but all the time he's aces in their places.
Yeah.
But he means that to his core. He wants everybody to be in the best fit for them that they're most inclined to do and that they enjoy the most. So I think that's special, and it kind of ties into our next point of how do we feel that ownership mentality affects employee engagement and job satisfaction?
You're so right. So aces in their places. We say it all the time, but it's so true. It's a lot of this is about getting people in the right seat. We talk about intrinsic motivators. A lot of it is just about somebody who's naturally wired. We talk about all the time in our organization, finding people who are naturally wired to succeed in their roles. And so getting those people in the right seats. But even beyond that, I think people have to feel, it's getting people in the right seat, but also people have to feel empowered to operate.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, people want to feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they've had a part in making something better than it was before. And when someone feels ownership in what they do and they believe in the mission of the organization, I think that you find that they're happier, they're more engaged, they're more productive, they're more inspired, and I think they're more, loyal.
Yes. Honestly, I think it's like they feel like they have a piece of the pie. And especially
absolutely.
in our organization, they
definitely
do.
Yeah, as an ESOP, they do.
Right. So I think that that's absolutely the effect that it can have on an organization. And when you're happy, you don't have that inclination to look outside. Mm-hmm. You want to look internal because you know the opportunities and the culture that you're already in, I feel, are as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So you don't have, I think that's why we maintain such a great retention with our employees. And you have,
there's a fierce loyalty that comes with that.
Yes.
When you feel like you own your responsibilities and it's your baby and you are a part of something bigger, there is a fierce loyalty that comes with that.
Yes.
And really, you know, it helps, like you said, with retention rates. It helps with attracting future talent because, you know, people learn, people talk, and people know about a culture and environment. And I think that's what a lot of people, especially post-COVID, I think are looking for more than ever, a positive employee experience to be a part of. And I think when you get an environment where you hear that people who work there love their job and they've been there for so many years and they feel empowered and they're excelling in their role, I think that's really attractive and something we spend a ton of time and effort in trying to make sure that we establish within our environment.
Yeah, I think that sense of community, like you said, especially post-COVID, is huge and plays a very big role in all of those pieces.
Yeah.
In what ways do you find that our culture of ownership mentality creates a more adaptable and resilient workforce?
One of the many benefits of that ownership mentality culture is that it reduces the dependence on the hierarchy of the company. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, when somebody is empowered in their job and they're not having to wait on someone to tell them the next move to make, and I know there's collaboration that has to happen, right? I mean, we collaborate, we work together. But if they're not having to wait on the next person to make the move and they're not fearful of making another move, the company is able to move so much quicker and be more agile and responsive and resilient, in meeting the demands of the business. And so I think this is, again, one of the greatest benefits of ownership mentality is just that we're able to pivot and move quickly.
Anything in our lives, we have our benefits, but nothing comes without its challenges. Mm-hmm. So what do you find has been, because I know you spend a lot of time with our executive leadership team and helping them make sure that we create and maintain this culture, what do you find are some of the common challenges that our leaders face when trying to instill this ownership mentality among our teams?
I think there's two sides to this, probably. I think the first is team members have to be willing to take ownership.
Right.
I think that's a challenge for sure. But then I think the other side of that is leaders have to be willing to grant ownership to team members, and that's just as tough. Difficult.
Yep.
It's hard to give up control, and it feels vulnerable and it feels uncomfortable, and that's really what essentially you're doing, is giving up a level of control when you're allowing team members to take full responsibility of what they do every day. And so I think as leaders, we kind of have to check ourselves and really question ourselves. Okay, am I really creating an environment that truly allows for ownership mentality, or am I just saying that I do?
Right.
And I think we can all be guilty of that.
I think, we talked about the rate at which our organization is growing, and not just our organization, but our industry in particular. And I think that that's something that we have to do, is to let go of that control so that we're able to discuss and handle some of those problems that maybe need to be in executive leadership's court, and let go of those things that we've hired people to do, knowing
Yep.
that they are fully capable of doing them and that they will excel, and to letting go of that and not doing, the micromanagement and staying over top of it, so that we can have a clear mind to address those other problems.
Yeah, and most times they will excel. I think we expect from people, usually you'll get, but I think you've also, as a leader, got to be prepared for if it does fail. And you've got to, I think that comes with trying to inspire an ownership mentality, is you've got to allow failure, and you've got to really almost promote failure.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to allow people and create an environment to feel like they can take a step into maybe what's uncomfortable for them, but will help them grow and develop in their role. And you've got to know that if they fail, hey, we got to pick you back up, and it's all right. We fail. We don't get it right every time, but your intentions were good, right? Because we're owners. We're thinking like owners. The intent was good. It didn't work. It may not have worked. It may have been. It may not have gone the way we planned, but
well, but we learned from it.
We learned from it. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, some of the people listening to this may listen and say, okay, well, all of that's great that you've talked about, and I can see where it makes sense for you guys because you've got this structure of an ESOP. So I guess, what would you say to people who feel that this mindset isn't applicable to them because they aren't in an ESOP, or that this isn't the foundation of their company or organization? Why is this something that can work in any organization or in your personal life?
Well, I think the fact is, whether you're an ESOP or not, I think certainly the ESOP inspires the foundation of ownership mentality.
Right, it's a big driving force.
Yes, absolutely. But whether you're an ESOP or not, I think people, I've said it before, but people want to feel a part of something, and like their skill sets are being used and that they're valued and needed. And so inspiring this ownership mentality is going to do all of those things. And so I think regardless of your structure and your company setup, I think you're going to absolutely benefit from a more engaged, satisfied, loyal employee group, which more than likely is going to your customers and your clients are going to experience that. That's another thing that we really haven't talked about at this point, but that is our customers are why we're here. And so when our employees are engaged and happy and they're here for the duration of their career, our customers recognize that, and they know that there's something special to be said about that. And so
I think I would just encourage people, maybe this isn't the organization that you're in, maybe this isn't the foundation, and maybe you feel that there isn't room for this. I don't think that that's where you need to settle into. I think that an ownership mentality, you may not think of it, or it may be something that seems obvious, but you are the owner of your life, so take that responsibility. And maybe it's not the foundation of the culture that you're in that they put in the handbook, but make it the foundation of your career and what you're aiming to do.
Yep.
Take that opportunity to say, well, I'm going to have this mindset shift, and I'm going to start thinking, if I was the owner of this company, what would be the decisions and the attitudes and behaviors that I would display as the owner?
Yeah. And I think any organization can employ ownership mentality within their culture. I think probably some organizations are going to have more of a challenge than others. I think, as we said, as our ESOP, it's really the foundation of our culture, and so it kind of comes naturally because we are owners. I think probably highly regulated businesses may have more challenges. I think organizations that have a lot of rank and order may have more challenges, just like we talked about, relinquishing some of that control is difficult. But although those are probably ones that could impact the most from ownership mentality,
Definitely.
And so I think those industries or organizations probably have more of a challenge because because of the size, it probably takes time for people to buy into that. But it is certainly not impossible. And I'm a believer that a lot of the times it's the small things that make a difference.
That was such a fun episode with Lydia and a really great way to kickstart our podcast here at Ensuring Success. We hope you'll continue to join us as we post more episodes on this series of ownership mentality and as we share our stories of leadership, growth, and success here at Houchens Insurance Group. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.